Hey everybody, welcome back to the Quest for the Bestest from Backlog Banter. It's the podcast where we are trying to figure out the very best picture winner of all time. And this week we are taking a look at 1982 Gandhi, directed by Richard Attenborough, starring Ben Kingsley as the man himself. A very long movie. We continue to get movies that are over 3 hours long, but this movie has a lot in it. There's a lot that happens. And a very interesting look at the life of one of history's maybe most important figures to date. But first, before we get into it, before we talk about it, which I'm looking forward to, we've got to do a little bit of housekeeping because we got a double whammy here. We last week talked about Barry Jenkins' Moonlight from 2016. It got an average score of 8.8 and ended up at place number 9 on our list. And if you recall going way back, 2 whole weeks, we talked about Mutiny on the Bounty, and we couldn't figure out where it went on our list. So we solicited a little bit of response from the audience, from you guys, and we received a couple votes here and there, and we figured out that Mutiny on the Bounty indeed is going to go above French Connection. A little bit to my dismay. I like French Connection, but that's the will of the people, and I will abide by it. And so, at place number 24, Mutiny on the Bounty now lists on our great big long ranking of the very best picture winners. So this time, we are going to be talking about Gandhi. First, though, going to hand it off to someone else, whoever wants to take the bat, about our featured comment from last week.
Our featured comment about Moonlight comes to us from our good friend Seth in the Discord. That link's in the description if you want to talk to us about any of the movies that we talked about on the show. But of Moonlight, Seth says he views it as not as impressive through the technical aspects, though it's fabulous in some cases, he says, but more through the social and political aspects it brings to the table by successfully representing a group of people that haven't had the chance to win Oscars or even make many movies. But it's a beautiful coming-of-age story nonetheless, with great heart.
There you go. Thank you, Seth, for the enlightened comment there. And if you want to be our enlightened commenter next week, throw your thoughts down in that little funky box below the video, and we'll make sure to read them.
It's so funky.
It's so funky.
Okay, enough of that. Let's talk about this movie. What did you guys think?
Gandhi.
It was nice to have a bit of a reprieve from 3-hour epic biopics and stuff and things of that nature. But let me say that it wasn't exactly a welcome back. But I think maybe Gandhi was one of the better instances that we could return on, because what is the core of this film, which is Ben Kingsley as Mahatma Gandhi, is very good. There's a lot of other things that are textbook biopic of the era, and it doesn't do a lot to break out of the box that it has painted itself into, and I think it suffers for that. There's a fair share of interesting things to talk about in this, but I really came up mostly like, yep, that's exactly what I expected it to be after watching Gandhi.
Okay.
When you pull up a movie that is about a historical figure and you see a 3-hour and 11-minute runtime, you know exactly what you're in for. And I think we got exactly what we were promised. And one thing I do want to mention is that the film opens on a little block of text admitting that, hey, this is a movie. This is 3 hours of a very important man's life. We can't fit everything in there. This has to be chopped down to a manageable story for a film. And I like that admission. It feels very honest. And I think that's how this film portrays itself, is a pretty honest and simplistic version of a man's life, which had a lot of things go on in it, believe it or not. But outside of that honesty, I do feel like it is kind of a mess of scenes. There's a lot of sequences in here, but there's also a lot of jumping around, and that's my least favorite aspect of biopics, especially ones that cover a large portion of someone's life. Is you got to jump from year to year. Character arcs and relationships don't necessarily follow through because you have to cut out so much time in the middle. Had that problem with Last Emperor, and I think this one kind of does that in a little worse ways because there's just such a huge amount of time period here. But I still think it's a good movie, and obviously Ben Kingsley's performance is the heart of it all. But yeah, it kind of has it kind of solidifies all my issues that I have with long form biopics.
There you
So
go.
it sounds a little bit like I might be the most positive here because while I
wow.
felt a lot of the same issues, I mean, we go from the end of the 19th century up through World War II, right? And I think inherent in that, to Tucker's point about having to cut and kind of truncate, I don't necessarily think all of the right things were shown. Right, I would have cut the movie differently, and I'm sure a lot of other people would have also. But despite these, I think, pacing issues and creative choices about what elements of his life to depict, I found the movie to be pretty compelling. I think that there's a lot of great performances here, and I think that the scale of this story is very interesting. And at certain points, it does feel like we're kind of being strung along for the next emotional beat, right? I think that there are some sequences here that are so good that they make up for the kind of the malaise of what might come before, what might come after. And because of that, I think it's kind of a muddled movie, but I think that the sort of the heart of it, the philosophy of it, it might be formulaic, but the precision of a lot of the filmmaking, I think, is very good. I just think it comes down to what was chosen to be shown opposed to not shown that lets the film down.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that the film was pretty standard in how it depicted stuff, but I was still interested to see what it depicted nonetheless. And just seeing, I was fairly wrapped up in the life of Gandhi and how and everything that happened and all the stuff that he did, that I didn't end up paying a lot of attention to like the film itself. I was engrossed in the narrative and I wasn't really thinking about the meta narrative. And so I found it enjoyable. It was fun. I was watching it in two parts late last night, and I was like, oh, I got to go to bed. It's like 2 a.m. I should go to bed. I was like, oh, but I want to keep watching this movie. It was so it was pulling me on and along enough. And I think that there's some incredibly well done sequences, and there's a couple shots here and there that are just like a little mind blowing. I think we'll get to it. Tanner's trivia, I think, will cover this, but it's there is some definitely very cool sequences, as well as some fairly emotional ones too.
Yeah.
I think that this film feels pretty similar in a lot of ways in terms of scale and time and obviously length of the film to The Last Emperor. And you can compare them on quite a few levels, but I think what this film does, I'm not going to say better because I don't prefer it, but differently from The Last Emperor, is that the filmmaking style stays out of the way of the story. And I know that Abram had a problem with The Last Emperor, it feeling like they're trying to get you to go ooh and ah for shots and sets and all that stuff. But this is very simplistic in its portrayal of the cinematography, of the sets, which are still impressive and large scale, but they're not drawn attention to. And I guess for me, I preferred the way that The Last Emperor did have those visual styling elements to pull me along through such a long film. So I was kind of missing that here, but I can respect it for wanting to stay out of its own way and let just the performances and the narrative of Mahatma Gandhi himself pull the film along, as opposed to, hey, look how cool this set is, look how cool this cinematography is.
Yeah. I mean,
such a good point. Hard to follow up.
It's hard to follow up. I want to talk about some specifics since we're on cinematography and shot composition and stuff. I think there were quite a few that did stand out to me. One of my personal favorites is following the massacre on those Indian protesters by that British commander, and his men, and it's the reverse shot of Gandhi looking at this well that's been stained with people's blood as they tried to fall down it and crawl down it in seeking out protection. And it goes to a reverse shot of Ben Kingsley again, who's the wordlessly his facial expression perfectly encapsulates the mood of Gandhi in that moment. And all behind Gandhi is like these vultures or similar birds flying through the sky behind him. I think that's not very subtle, but it's realistic if you have a field full of dead bodies.
Yeah,
and
sure. Of course, there's going to be buzzards or something. Yeah,
it really adds to the like this ambiance and this horror of 1,500 people died here. And when they said
that's
that number,
such a huge amount of people.
Yeah,
when they said that number following that sequence, you're like, Jesus Christ, 1,500 people.
Yeah.
And
I
that's
think that's probably the most impactful sequence in the
Yes.
film.
oh yeah, by far.
By a pretty significant margin.
Yeah.
And I think that scene kind of highlights for me what works about this movie and what it doesn't, and it kind of jumps off of both of what you guys just said, right? This is a movie similar to, and I'm trying to start any arguments here in the middle of this episode, similar to me to Spotlight, where the source material carries the movie, not necessarily the filmmaking elements of it,
Yeah.
right? And so I think that there is a real horror to that massacre sequence, largely because of the events depicted, but I think somewhat partially because of some of the filmmaking techniques cutting between the soldiers slaughtering those people down to the empty casings on the ground, right? I think that there are some elements there, but I was kind of left with a wanting for more of that.
Sure.
Because otherwise it is Ben Kingsley as Gandhi delivering a very powerful performance, but a performance that it really is predicated on who Gandhi was and predicated on us wanting to learn more about his life, not necessarily because anyone behind the camera was putting anything unique or compelling out there. So that's kind of the tension I felt throughout almost the entirety of the film. The massacre sequence being one exception, the other exception being when they're trying to get into the salt mines and they keep being hit.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that's the other incredible
Great
sequence of the film. But otherwise, it is about who these characters were, wanting to know more about that, not the way that it was told to us.
Which I found myself at least buying into the idea that, oh, I want to learn more about Gandhi. As I was watching, I kind of realized it was like, oh, I maybe don't know that much at all, really, about like specifically, you know, I'd heard of the March to the Sea, but I'd never heard of the massacre, and I never heard of a lot of the stuff that I just was never taught about. And so the film at least provided an avenue to learn about that, and I was put in the right mind space by it in the beginning to be accepting and be like, okay, yeah, we're here to learn something as well as be a little entertained by this film. And I thought that there were plenty of entertaining moments, maybe not in like the fun entertaining, but in like a victorious kind of entertaining. The film definitely makes you feel good at a lot of points. I felt very, very good watching the movie about
People can come together and get something done.
Yeah. I mean, the message of the thematic material of the film is not that different at all from the thematic material of Gandhi's life. But if there's some thematic material from someone's life to borrow, well, Gandhi's not a horrible choice.
Especially if you're making a movie about Gandhi.
That does come well together.
I will say, though, sorry to cut you off, but to go directly off of that point, I think the one problem with that is that this movie does become the Gandhi show in its entirety, right? Which makes sense. But my point is, we spend a surprising amount of time with side characters who are not really developed at all. And that was part of my issue, right? We become so foregrounded on Gandhi, obviously, because it's his biopic. But when you present him as being almost part of an ensemble of less important characters, but still important, influential figures in Gandhi's life, I start to feel disconnected when I don't even really know characters' names or exactly what they're doing, because I didn't feel like they were given the time to be fleshed out the same way that Gandhi himself was.
I feel like that example comes true with all of our politician figures. We have our Indian National Congress politicians who I know that they're politicians and they have to do that, but I kind of forget their names and I forget I know that one of them is Muslim and a couple of them are Hindu, and there's conflict later in the film in that regard. But you're right that I am mostly lost in terms of side characters, and I just see them interact in terms of Gandhi, and I don't ever see them for their own characters, really.
And that is especially true for the antagonists of the film, the villains of the film, which are anyone who's on the British side of things. They all act the exact same way. You see them maybe every 25 minutes and they show up and you're, oh, that's right, that is going on in the background. And that, I think that's probably one of the weakest elements of the film to me is, well, obviously there's a lot of stakes in terms of entire countries and governments being mishandled. I never felt like there were people and faces and personalities, even villain-wise, that I could connect to say, okay, this is the foil to Gandhi's good. Where is the bad? It's just a couple of somewhat like bumbling British politicians. Like one of the guys like smirks when he says that they're gonna put Gandhi in jail. I was like, oh, that just feels like a cartoony villain almost. But I think that the side characters who are the Indian guys who are supporting Gandhi are slightly more memorable and interesting because you're able to see them in so many different sequences throughout his entire life. And one thing that this movie does very, very well is age up its characters. They use,
Yes.
for the most part, the same actors for 50 plus years worth of screen time. And
Mm-hmm.
oh my God, that makeup is amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it works.
Especially
Very
on Ben
good.
Kingsley. He plays such a range of age that
Mhm.
is off the charts, and you always feel like he's in that moment. And you can feel the weariness and age and experience and jadedness of all of his friends or the people in the Indian National Congress, but they're not given enough time to shine on the same level that Ben Kingsley is. So
Yeah.
yeah, that the imbalance there is very clear, like Abram was saying.
To speak to both the makeup on Ben Kingsley and Ben Kingsley himself as a performer, my first bit of trivia is here. Reportedly, when they were shooting in these, remote villages in India, because they shot on location, some of the people in these villages, especially elders, thought that they were looking at Gandhi. Reportedly, whether that be they were seeing some sort of spiritual reincarnation of him. But Ben Kingsley was apparently so convincing that some of these people thought they were looking at him because, and this is something that maybe doesn't come across in the film that well, but maybe this is after his death, especially, is that something I learned in looking into this film is that Gandhi is looked on by some people in India as essentially like a deity, in some sense. He's the guy who freed them from this oppressive British rule. And I have some more interesting trivia about that, but I'll get to that in a second, probably. But um,
I feel like the film
I-
almost portrays him in that light too. He does seem
Yeah.
fairly otherworldly. I think maybe
Mhm.
even the film uses that line to describe him at one point. A character says like, "Oh, don't be disturbed by his otherworldliness."
Oh yes, yeah.
But the way that it does convey this idea of like he's not a larger than life character in any way in the film. Because just the way he is, but the accomplishments that it shows to you are extreme. They're huge accomplishments.
Yeah.
But I think it wisely focuses on the intimate and the personal, and about the small emotional moments within this great big struggle. We don't see we see the flags changing, but that's about the most. We don't see any like politicking or any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that. I'm actually much more interested in the personal life. If we're gonna do a biopic about this one guy, I would rather it actually be about him rather than be about like what he did.
Sure. Yeah.
Sure.
I think it circumvents a lot of the issues of that biopics have is checking off things that happened in their life, like on a grand scale. Because speaking of the raising of flags thing, one of my favorite edits in this film is towards the very end when they're raising the flags of India and Pakistan. These nations have they've freed themselves from British rule, but now they're fighting against each other along religious lines. And it's raising these two flags, and we see some fighting. We see people celebrating at the capitals of these two nations, and then we cut to Mahatma Gandhi at his little tiny home in the middle of nowhere, spinning some thread. Just he was the man who essentially had a huge hand in getting all of this done, and he's nowhere to be found at these places. He's humbly sitting at home, spinning some clothes for him to wear.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think that the moments I remember from his life are like when the little girl has the goat, the sprained ankle, right? And he leaves with her to go help her heal this goat, right? And I think that in a film that is not really subtle because it doesn't really try to do more than just retell the life, there is a good amount of subtlety in just that script and what it allows him to do. And I think that it's helped by excellent performance from Ben Kingsley. I really think that he has a lot of power when he's on screen. Again, due in large part to who he's playing, but I think he just plays him very convincingly. And for me, especially in good acting is great, but it's really bad acting that I notice. And good acting usually goes a little bit under the radar for me. But in a biopic, I'm paying closer attention to that, right? And I think that Ben Kingsley really did sell himself as Gandhi very well.
Sure.
I think the character arc and subtlety of that performance and the story of Gandhi is interesting in large part because it's kind of an inverted character arc. He doesn't come from humble beginnings and become super powerful. He's an educated, well-to-do guy. He comes from powerful beginnings and goes to humble endings. And of course, there's a lot of power in the middle, but he never lets that go to his head. And that's just so inverted of what we're used to seeing in stories. And that just made it interesting, especially the fact that I didn't know he was a lawyer. Like we don't learn a lot about Gandhi in our American history class. Well, obviously not American, but history classes in America. And just hearing that, oh yeah, this guy who is a powerful speaker was a lawyer, that makes a lot of sense. And of course, that's how he gets wrapped up in the whole shebang, if you will. But his performance especially shines through, I think, with something that we're going to talk about in terms of trivia, is him giving speeches. He gives these long monologues that are talking about philosophy, and he's sitting there in front of crowds of thousands and thousands and thousands of people, and none of that is CGI. Those are people sitting there, and he's actually sitting in front of them and projecting his voice out to reach thousands of literal, actual, real people.
Yes.
And that's just the scale that this movie works best. Like it gives you cinematic chills, like something in Ben-Hur or Lawrence of Arabia do, when you see crowds of, and I think this is probably one of the trivia things that Tanner has, but I'm gonna steal it out from underneath him.
Go for it.
The crowd for the funeral, 300,000 extras.
300,000. That's a humongous number.
The record holder, by the way, for most extras in a scene. Probably forever, since they just don't make movies with actual people on set for these large crowd scenes anymore.
Yeah.
So this
Especially
will
not
probably
a pandemic.
Yeah, especially this will go down in history most likely as the most extras ever used for a scene.
Yeah.
And boy, does it! I mean, let's just talk about. We're talking about the shot with the funeral.
Yes.
Towards the beginning of the movie, where it's unimaginably wide. We're way high up and we're way wide, and there's just people that just go. The crowd just goes and goes, and it goes forever. Yeah.
Yes.
That is a thing where, like, as a filmmaker, I'm just like, yeah, that's awesome.
I have more details about this sequence, just so you know. It utilized 19 cameras and 11 crews to get the coverage for this entire thing.
Whoa, okay.
It was filmed on January 31st, 1981, in memory of the 33rd anniversary of Gandhi's death. And actually, for all this business that they went through, getting 300,000 people, it takes up 2 minutes of screen time in the film.
Yeah, it's a relatively understated scene in how just truly impressive it is.
And also, one thing I did hear about that sequence is that they were going to use a wax body, like a dummy of Ben Kingsley, on the actual funeral proceeding that his body is on, but it kept melting, so they just put actual Ben Kingsley there. So that's just actually him laying there,
and
like flowers over his eyes or whatever.
One last thing about this sequence. This is a bit of a, I guess this is kind of funny. It sort of depends on how you look at it. Him handling an assistant director for this film handling the sequence. So they were obviously wrangling 300,000 extras.
Oh my God.
So Richard Attenborough turns to his assistant director David Tomblin and he says, "David, I think the crowd should spend a moment contemplating Gandhi's life and what death means to India at this moment, because the crowd was kind of getting restless and they looked a little bored. So instead of like saying something profound, Tomblin grabs a megaphone and yells, 'Right, listen up. Gandhi's dead. You're all sad. Roll cameras.'"
That is that's in context. Actually, it's pretty funny.
Yeah,
just like the way he said it and all that. Yeah, I think that just goes to show the way I think about this movie. In that, it has a scale that is kind of difficult to really comprehend. I mean, it's 60 years of life on camera, and because of that, we get these jumping around, and there's many some years later title cards in the film, and we've gone a given number of years in the future. And so those are both pluses and drawbacks. But I think that at least for me, in large strokes, the film succeeds in picking moments that highlight this personal character of Gandhi. We're sticking to him as this character that we're going to focus on. He's going to be up on the pillar, and if we're going to not really delve too deep into the side characters, which is what the choice that the film makes, I would say. Then having these great grand moments, and there's a couple of other shots and sequences in the film that just have like that sheer scale element to them that I find is just it's nice to watch. It's cool to watch. I like seeing it. This is a horrible way to describe it, but
Yeah.
it's a lot more than cool. It's a lot more than cool.
I wanted to talk a bit more about Ben Kingsley as Gandhi in this, because I think Tucker brings up a lot of great points. How it's so interesting that we see him, going on this inverted character arc, and how he plays into those the 60 years of life, like Timo said. I think there's also an interesting amount of if we're exploring the personal life of this guy, and it's sort of like, I think Tucker said this earlier. We don't learn a lot about Gandhi. So what we do learn in school is that he was a guy, and through peaceful protest, he ended British tyrannical rule in India. And you sort of get this idea that, he's this very soft-spoken guy. But one of my favorite moments is when he goes to the courtroom, and he's on trial for, something about, like inciting a rebellion or something like that.
Happens quite a few times.
But it's towards the end, and it seems like the punishment for this crime is death. And Gandhi knows this. He's a lawyer. He's an educated. He knows what's going down, and he basically has this air about him that's like, yeah, kill me. See what happens. It's not going to solve anything. It's going to make your situation worse. He never says that in so many words, but it's the way that he carries himself. And the sort of line delivery that he gives to these guys, where he's talking about the effects of what people view him as and why this is important to these people. He's basically says, "Fuck around and find out," is what he says to these British guys.
Yeah.
Yes, the movie brings back quest for the bestest, oldest, and bestest term, subtleism. I think there's a lot of great subtleism here, but I also think there is a really powerful moment of just overtness, being when, after the massacre, the British general's on trial, right? And he's giving these very just honest answers about, yeah, I was going to kill these people. I would have used a machine gun tank if I could have, right? And I think the film knows when to juxtapose these quieter moments with louder moments, or these more subtle thematic moments with just really overt things that help develop a theme of, imperialism and anti-imperialism that is kind of backgrounded, I think, in some respects, just by nature of focusing on Gandhi and his message. I think that theme could have gotten a little bit more lost had it not been for some of these great sequences like this with the British general. But I do think you could have perhaps introduced a little bit more nuance, because it's very cool seeing Gandhi stand up to these guys. But Gandhi was also kind of a pain in the ass to the people around him at times. He's walking out of meetings. He's fasting when they don't want him to, right? And I would have liked maybe a little bit more exploration of that. I think that would have required the side characters being fleshed out a little bit better. But I think having a little bit of a gray area depicted in and how he approached this revolution might have made this film a little bit more toothy and feel a little bit less by the numbers. But that was just my read of it.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean,
I definitely think that's reasonable.
that makes sense. I also think that if this film could stand to be longer, that would be immediately what I would want to add. If you could make this film 4 hours long and still have people actually watch it, that would be the interesting part to add. But when you start juggling, there's so much to tell, and we want to make sure that we tell these side characters too. It's like, yeah, you could make a lot of movies out of this source material here. So I think it's a great point. And that it's time is the enemy.
Yeah, I do think this movie strikes a weird balance for me in terms of the runtime of it, because it does show obviously a lot. It's covering a lot of everything from every aspect that you possibly could show a lot of. But I do think it's too long. I do think there are things that could have been cut, that have trimmed down to connect things together a little more, to make it feel a little more coherent, so you're not jumping around as much. And while there is another movie that is extra long, Gandhi, that is more compelling because it fleshes things out, I do think that there is power in knowing when something is a scene that doesn't really connect to other stuff or feels a little bit out of place. Because one thing this movie does have a problem with is that it kind of feels like there's a lack of direction. You're following a guy's life, and things are going to happen because he knows what he's going to do in his own head, but there's not a super clear progression to scenes because you're jumping from big moment to big moment, and it doesn't feel like things are for some things built up to properly. I just feel like it lacks. It's an interesting narrative overall, but I don't know how I feel about it as a film narrative, as a progression from Act 1 to Act 2. Of course, this is not a 3-act structure movie, but in terms of film story progression, I think this movie does lose some marks in my mind. And why, as we're getting to the last 25 minutes of this film and we're still being introduced to new conflicts and characters interacting and stuff, I started to lose a little bit of interest. It had been so long. This is 2.5 movies worth of movie, and I did find myself becoming disinterested and a little bit bored and wandering in my thoughts as it was going. Though it did keep me engaged for most of the runtime. There's definitely that element of, okay, this is still going, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I set it up top. You know, when you get yourself into a 3-hour and 10-minute movie, you kind of know what you're going for, and you're going to have dips in interest and dips in, conflict stuff where you're in some quieter moments that can lose you over that 3-hour runtime. And Gandhi doesn't solve those problems. It doesn't avoid them in any way. So I think it's only fair to level the same criticisms that I have at other long movies that have won Best Picture, because boy howdy do the Oscars love long Best Picture winners, because this film won 8 of those little golden boys.
Ooh, nice transition.
Oh, yeah,
to
it did.
noms there, bucko.
So obviously this won Best Picture. Ben Kingsley won Best Actor. Well deserved, I would say, almost certainly.
I think one of my favorite Best Actors. I mean, I recently actually read a ranking of all the Best Picture winners I'd seen, but yeah, lists. And he's definitely up there.
Yeah. Richard Attenborough won Best Director.
Totally reasonable.
This film won Best Screenplay, Best Cinematography, Best Set Direction, Best Costume Design, Best Editing, and it was nominated for Best Sound, Best Original Score, and Best Makeup. Surprised that it didn't win Best Makeup.
I'm
it was
surprised
great
too.
stuff.
Yeah, I was gonna say about the costumes and the sets and everything. It's a period piece. That's traditionally quite Oscar bait like, but I found that everything just worked so seamlessly that I never paid attention to it, and I never really questioned it. I was like, yeah, that dude's a British general. I was like, yeah, that's Gandhi, or this is how the traditional Indian people dress. It's like, I was like, yep, cool. Like, this looks all right. And I think shooting on location, shooting in India, I mean, this film was like largely paid for by the Indian government, and so
1/3.
Yeah, that's the right choice. Why would you do it anywhere else? So I'm glad that bears fruit, and we get to see it in the film, because there's some breathtaking wide landscape shots here that aren't sets, but they're just what's really there.
Yeah.
Reminiscent of Lawrence of Arabia, some might say, which is interesting because David Lean and Sam Spiegel were actually initially attached to this all the way back in the 1960s.
Wow.
This film had like a 20-year production hell visit before it finally got made.
I heard it started in the 50s.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's also entirely possible.
Yeah.
But over that 20 to 30 year span, there was quite a few actors attached to this, and this is sort of a thing off of last week when I made the rash assumption that Ben Kingsley wasn't Indian or of Indian descent, which he obviously is, and I bear that mistake in mind. But it was more of a comment about how I wouldn't be surprised if Hollywood casted a white guy as Mahatma Gandhi.
Yeah.
That was not incorrect. Here are some of the other people who were considered for the role during the time.
Ooh, okay.
Dustin Hoffman was apparently considered for the role. John Hurt auditioned, and when he auditioned, apparently they made him wear brown body paint and a diaper. So there's that. Anthony Hopkins was offered the role, and Alec Guinness was attached to the project back when David Lean and Spiegel were working on it. So there you go.
Okay. Well, oh man.
Yeah. But
Yeah, I'm
it's
glad
hard-
they did what they did because that would.
I'm glad they didn't. And also, it's hard this film would be much less well remembered and less regarded, especially in that performance standpoint, if any of these guys were attached to it. Because outside of the race thing, it is hard to imagine any of those guys playing Mahatma Gandhi when Ben Kingsley just sort of disappears into this role really, really effortlessly. And he spent a lot of time. He actually moved to India and sort of lived in a rural Indian area to sort of get ready for this role. He learned to actually spin his own clothes for this role, which was you can see that he just he melts very naturally and he embodies this otherworldly guy very well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Ben Kingsley casting is very good. There's a couple other funny casting choices. I like that Martin Sheen is in this movie.
Yeah.
He's an American reporter. And then a little Chariots of Fire throwback. Ian Charleston
Charles Charleston.
Is also in this film. I guess they're both sort of British films.
Yes.
Well, this one is less of a British film than Chariots of Fire
Richard
is.
Attenborough.
Yeah,
He's a British guy.
They come, production is out of Britain, so it's kind of funny to see some familiar faces in a film where I really wasn't expecting to see any. I was like, oh, we're in a biopic that's shot on location. Cool, we get lots of Indian actors and non-actors, and then Martin Sheen shows up, and I'm like, oh, hey, Martin Sheen.
It's funny that you bring up familiar faces, Timo, because there's a certain very famous actor that makes a little cameo appearance in this.
Debut, I believe.
Yeah, his first ever movie. If you're a keen-eyed viewer like one Tucker Hazel, you may have noticed Daniel Day-Lewis in a bit part in this film. He plays Colin, a random guy on the street in South Africa who accosts Gandhi and one of his friends. We were watching him, and Tucker says, that guy looks like Daniel Day-Lewis. I'm like, there's no way. So I had to scroll all the way through the cast, and somewhere in the middle, it's like, yep, Daniel Day-Lewis. He's like 20 or something in this. His very first movie. How interesting.
Wow. Yeah, very interesting. So I think the casting director of this film was on to something.
Yeah, they got the right guy. Even though he's fine in this. He's no Daniel Day-Lewis if we're honest.
Okay, well, do we have any final thoughts before we should jump into our ranking? You want to just give out a thesis statement or any last thing that you haven't hit upon yet that you want to talk about?
Yeah, there's one thing I wanted to say. We kind of moved on with Tanner's dynamite transition to the awards. But for me, and I don't say this often, I would have liked another 45 minutes to this film. I do actually think that we could have benefited from that, especially when we get into the religious conflict.
4 hours.
Yes, I'll take 4 hours of Gandhi because I think when you get into the religious conflicts, a little bit more runtime there would have really benefited us because that plot, I wouldn't say it feels shoehorned in or underdeveloped, but I just think that there was a conclusion that I felt like we were missing, especially when some of the most powerful material in the film comes from that, like the guy who tells Gandhi that he killed a child, right, and he's trying to find God still. So I would have liked a little bit more there. And also because I found the film pretty easy to watch. On the Abram Buner patented scale of how many times did I check my Twitter feed during my viewing, I was on the lower end, right? And
good.
I think that's a function
Only
partially
like 40 times.
Yeah, only like once every 2 minutes or so. But no, I think the excellence of that set design and the costuming and everything really immerses you in the world, right? And it's biopic stuff. It's by merit of the source material, right? But I just think that there was a lot of faithful production behind this, from having all those extras to having this attention to detail to putting these little character moments throughout. I do think that in spite of my issues, this is one of probably maybe not my favorite biopic we've seen for Quest, but it's definitely one of the better ones. If The Last Emperor boring barometer still existed, we would be above that, right? I think that this is a pretty impressive and watchable film.
Yeah, I think that's a surprising thing about it. Maybe the point I was trying to make earlier about me just wanting to keep watching it. I was like, okay, I'm going to stop after 2 hours, so I only have an hour to do the next day. And then I've watched another like half hour after I said I would stop because it's just like, the scenes just kept rolling. And I was like, even if like looking back at the scenes in the macro of them, maybe they didn't exactly fit in there. In the moment to moment, I was like, yeah, cool. This is a good movie and that I'm enjoying watching, and I'm just gonna keep doing it because I like watching movies. So this is an interesting film to recommend. I would recommend this film to just about anyone.
Well, there you go. Well, I mean, yeah, it's very easily accessible
Go out
outside of
and
that.
watch Gandhi.
Absolutely.
5-year-olds.
Sit them down just for that horrible scene of the massacre.
Yeah,
And
they-
see what that does to them. You know.
With that really powerful shot of the little girl sitting by a dead body
Oh,
and just crying.
yeah.
Jesus
Freaking
Christ,
awesome.
that's
Also-
a
oh my
Also,
god.
quick thing.
Yeah.
I don't notice the score a lot, but there was a few moments where that score comes through, especially in intense moments like that I really enjoyed. So,
yeah, I was
that's
a
my
little.
last thing.
The score, very good. I like the score
Yes.
a lot too.
Okay.
Okay.
Speaking of scores,
Speaking, nice.
Beautiful, Abram. Beautiful.
Let's punch him in. How about we
Okay.
do that? I've got mine ready. You,
Okay, let's do it.
3, 2, 1.
Well, there we go.
that.
We have a number for you. It's 7.5. So
Mhm.
exactly 3/4 of the way to 100, and it's pretty even. It's
Yeah.
literally actually 7.5.
75%.
The point breakdown starting from the bottom, Tanner gave it a 6.9, Tucker gave it a 7.4, Aim gave it a 7.7, and I gave it an 8.0. So pretty, not that different. I mean, we're pretty right around the same area,
Yeah,
same
yeah.
thought process. I can tell everyone's got the same thinking about it as they're putting it in. So a 7.5, if we go and look, it's
Puts it
going to
at a
have to
tie.
fight with Platoon. I don't know if we're going to have to do a lot of fighting because I know where I put this in terms of
Sure.
versus Platoon. But what about you guys?
Platoon easily for me.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, I also go with Platoon.
Uh-oh. Tanner?
Not again. Oh,
Not
no.
again.
No,
This is a great fit. We should do this every week.
Oh, I mean, based off of raw scores, I do have Platoon at a 7 point something, but and this could be recency bias. I don't know. I couldn't tell you, but I have in the weeks following Platoon, I've just forgotten a lot of that movie. Almost none of it has stuck with me. So wait, does that means if I go Gandhi, that means it's a 50-50 tie.
It would
Timo,
mean-
do you have the full number? Do you have the full scores pulled up for us?
That is true. There is technically that extra bit.
Well,
Yeah.
Though I
so-
like the idea of arguing a little bit.
Yeah, so technically Platoon is at a 7.53 and Gandhi's at a 7.50. I will say
Sure.
I think Gandhi goes above Platoon. I gave Platoon like a 5.5, so
Damn.
it's just not my favorite Vietnam War film, and I think that there are other films that do more. And while Platoon is powerful in its moments, there is something about the life affirmingness of Gandhi. Gandhi, I feel okay as a human being watching Gandhi, and I really don't when I'm watching Platoon. And I know that that's the
Sure.
point, but that's the difference.
I
sure.
think for me, first of all, yes, Timo, I agree with you. It's no apocalypse now or anything, but I think what a Platoon succeeds at is this sort of like gnawing dread and horror that I think is far harder to evoke and speaks a lot more clearly to a really interesting artist behind the camera, right? I think in Gandhi, the strongest moments are when your heart is down in your stomach, right? When the massacre is happening or something, and that's all of Platoon. And so whereas I see Gandhi succeeding on the merit of his life, right? I see Platoon succeeding on the merit of the people that built that depiction of Vietnam, not necessarily because that's any less rote than a biopic, but because I think that there's more interesting filmmaking that went into Platoon to evoke inside me what it did evoke and what I can still conjure back up, I guess, opposed to Tanner all of these weeks after watching it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm on the same page. I do think that Platoon is for me just more powerful. I do like the idea of feeling okay about myself. And when I'm watching Gandhi, I'm like, actually, there was a person in the world that's actually okay. Didn't think that beforehand. But now, when we're thinking back to Platoon, it does have a much greater emotional impact on me, and I think the sequences are more creative filmically, and it has a wide cast of characters, which I'm a fan of. So while Gandhi is a better character than anyone in Platoon, the fact that there are 12 plus guys in Platoon, and like half of them are really focused on. That ensemble nature definitely gives it a bump for me as well.
The better Sheen performance also, I will add.
Well, how about that? Father v son. How about that? I will say, if I were equal time removed from Platoon and Gandhi, I think I would be more interested to revisit Platoon, because looking back at Gandhi, I think I'd say, oh, I get it. Sort of even my mood about it before watching is like, I kind of get it.
Yeah.
I'll probably remember that I liked Ben Kingsley's performance and maybe some of those better moments. But I think I would be more interested to revisit Platoon. I actually pulled up my old notes for Platoon on my phone here real quick, and looking back, ye old notes all the way back from December 29th.
We were such little naive.
Wow, that was a long time ago.
A lot like the boys getting drafted into the Vietnam War. But I think, looking back at this, I'm like, oh, I did have some interesting
really
thoughts
bad
about
joke
this
there.
movie. Oh.
Yeah, that was maybe a little off color.
It was the point of the movie. That's what the point of the movie.
I thought it was funny.
It's what the point of the movie was. But I did have interesting thoughts about Platoon. So, be it the raw score or be it my vote, it seems like Platoon.
That's where I was sensing it was all going, because I think Tanner or Abram actually makes very, very salient good points about the filmic nature of it, and we have to remind ourselves that this is about the best pictures, and while I think it's an important movie and a politically interesting film, and that's what best pictures often end up being, I think that you are right that Platoon does more with the medium, and that is an interesting point of comparison, and the one that does that better probably should be higher. So I can agree with that.
Gandhi is certainly one of the
placement.
most pictures.
True, one of the longest. Hopefully we get a bit of a breezier one next time. How about that?
At the end of Quest, we should do the vote for the most picture.
The vote for the
which has the most moving pictures.
hard to say.
Say.
Gandhi is going to go at place number 28 on our list with an average score of 7.5. Sadly, breaking up the two Vietnam War films from each other. An interesting dividing line between them. But there you go. That's just how the cookie crumbles, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Well, should we spin our little yarn? Spin our own clothes a little bit with a mystery random number wheel?
Yes,
No?
actually.
Sure, Timo. Yeah, that lead up.
What if we all just said no one day? No, we don't. We don't want to spin it this time.
No, we don't want to spin it. We are tired of the random gods of number chance. But no, we're not. No, we'll never be tired of the random gods
never
of number
be.
chance. Tanner, you want to lead us in a little choral recitement?
I would. Wheel, wheel, what's your deal? Give us a movie that makes us squeal. Is it on digital? Is it unreal? Wheel, wheel. Hey, what's your deal?
And the wheel's deal this week is place number 11. Place number 11.
Okay.
Film number 11. What could that be? What could that be?
Film number 11 is actually a movie that Tanner and I mentioned, or I mentioned to Tanner last night. It is the 2001 Best Picture winner, starring Paul Bettany, Christopher Plummer, Ed Harris, Jennifer Connelly, and Russell Crowe. Directed by Ron Howard. We'll be watching A Beautiful Mind.
A Beautiful Mind.
Tucker, you got a beautiful mind on you, and I like that about you. Calling this, predicting this last night. What are you, some sort of... Who's he? What's his name? He's kind of a famous
character's name?
movie. Yeah, give me this character's name.
John Nash.
John Nash. You're a regular John Nash, Tucker.
He's the founder of Nashville.
Oh, interesting.
The city.
Mm-hmm. No, I got it.
I've seen some clips from this film, but I haven't ever seen it, and it's another biopic, kind of.
Oh, well, how about that? Tucker, what's the runtime on this?
A snappy 2:15.
Yep. Not too bad at all. Compared to what we just saw, it should feel like a walk in the park. A nice walk down to the ocean.
I really want Marty, which is 93 minutes, to be back-to-back with Gone with the Wind. I think that would be a hilarious juxtaposition.
That'd be funny.
It's entirely unlikely, but can we actually can we make a rule here that if we get Marty or Gone with the Wind, we have to watch the other one the week after? No spinning. Just say screw you to the guys of random chance and just watch the other one so we can juxtapose them.
The shortest and the longest.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
Tucker.
fine with that.
How about I say, audience, if you would allow us to betray the gods of random chance, let us know down in the comments. As well as your thoughts about Gandhi.
Yes, your thoughts about Gandhi, most importantly, and then second most importantly, do we tempt it? Because if you give us permission, then it's your fault when shit hits the fan, and
Yes.
the gods are really angry at us for disobeying them. But
we get smote on camera.
The gods of random chance are one thing, but the gods of John Tor 11 and Dan Eberhardt are really what I'm worried about. So we're going to need some permission in that comment section before we do something like this.
Yes.
Well, there we go. Nice, great discussion about Gandhi. Enjoyable film. I enjoyed my time watching it, and you know that's what you can hope for when you're watching a film, is to have it enjoyable. So next time we will be discussing Ron Howard's A Beautiful Mind. We'll get to see some good Russell Crowe action. I haven't watched a movie with Russell Crowe in a long time, so I'll be looking forward to it, at least for that. And we'll be back talking about it. Thank you guys for joining me, and well, peace out.
Yeah, look at him.
I feel like I'm hallucinating.
I don't know what's happening.
What? Oh, do you guys want to see? Oh, I didn't know you were here. Hello, fuzzy ball.
He's talking to Leafy and Fiery.